It was a beautiful autumn evening in Chicago when Marcus and Diane Thompson walked hand in hand toward Le Blanc, one of the city's most exclusive French restaurants. The golden sunset painted the sky as the couple, married for 10 years that very day, made their way down Michigan Avenue. Marcus, at 45, carried himself with quiet confidence in his perfectly tailored navy blue suit. His salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the distinguished look fitting for a federal judge, though he never flaunted his position. Diane, 42, was striking in her crimson dress and pearl necklace, her natural hair styled elegantly. As the CEO of Chicago Memorial Hospital Network, she was used to commanding rooms full of executives, but tonight she was simply a wife looking forward to a romantic evening with her husband. They had planned this dinner weeks in advance. Le Blanc was nearly impossible to get into, with reservations often booked months ahead. But Marcus had pulled some strings through a colleague who knew the chef, and he wanted everything to be perfect for their anniversary. As they approached the restaurant's elegant glass doors, Marcus smiled at his wife. "Remember our first date?" he asked. "That little pizza place where the chairs kept wobbling?" Diane laughed, the sound warm and rich. "And you kept trying to fix my chair with napkins under the legs." She squeezed his hand. "Look at us now." The maitre, a thin man named Pierre, greeted them at the entrance. He wore a black suit and had a small tablet in his hands. "Good evening," he said with a slight French accent. "Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," Marcus replied. "Thompson, hearty of 2 for 7:30. Pierre scrolled through his tablet, his expression professional but slightly distant. "Ah, yes, Thompson." He paused for a moment, looking them over. Something in his demeanor shifted, almost imperceptibly. "Please, follow me." The restaurant's interior was something out of a classic movie. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, casting a warm glow over the white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. The walls were decorated with elegant paintings of the French countryside, and soft classical music played in the background. Well-dressed diners sat at tables, engaged in quiet conversation over plates of expertly prepared French cuisine. Pierre led them through the main dining room, past tables of people who glanced up briefly from their meals. Some returned to their conversations immediately, while others' gazes lingered a bit longer than necessary. Marcus and Diane were used to it, being often the only black couple in such establishments, but they didn't let it bother them. They had earned their place here, just like anyone else. Their table was near a beautiful bay window overlooking a small garden courtyard. Marcus pulled out Diane's chair for her, just as he had done on every date for the past decade. A young waitress approached with menus and a warm smile. "Good evening, I'm Sarah, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," she said, handing them each a leather-bound menu. "Can I start you off with some water and perhaps a bottle of wine?" "Yes, water would be lovely," Diane replied. "And we'd love to see the wine list." As Sarah walked away, Marcus reached across the table and took his wife's hand. 10 years, he said softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am." Diane was about to respond when she noticed movement near the restaurant's entrance. A man in an expensive suit was speaking with Pierre, gesturing animatedly. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and a red face that was growing redder by the minute. He kept looking in their direction. "Marcus," Diane said quietly, "I think we might have a situation." Marcus followed her gaze and saw the man, who was now walking purposefully toward their table. Even after all these years, after all their achievements, they both knew that look. It was the look of someone who thought they didn't belong. "Just remember who we are," Marcus whispered, squeezing her hand. "Whatever happens, we handle it with dignity." The man, who they would soon learn was Gerald Weber, the owner of Le Blanc, was almost at their table now. His face was set in a mask of barely concealed displeasure, and his hands were clenched at his sides. Sarah returned with their water and wine list, seemingly unaware of the approaching storm. As she began to speak, Weber reached the table, his shadow falling across their pristine white tablecloth like a dark omen of what was to come. The perfect evening they had planned was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would not only change their lives but would send ripples through the entire city of Chicago. Gerald Weber stood over Marcus and Diane's table, his presence casting a heavy shadow. His expensive suit and gold watch showed his wealth, but his face showed something uglier, pure contempt. Sarah, the waitress, stopped mid-sentence, sensing the tension in the air. Is there a problem here? Weber asked, not looking at Marcus or Diane, but instead addressing Sarah. His voice was loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Diners began to turn their heads, conversations dying down as people sensed the brewing confrontation. No, sir, Mr. Weber, Sarah replied nervously. I was just getting the Thompsons started with their water and wine list. Weber's face twisted into an unpleasant smile. I see. And do these people have a reservation? The way he said people made it clear exactly what he meant. Marcus spoke up calmly, maintaining his composure. Yes, we do. Under Thompson for 7:30. Your maitre d' just seated us. Weber pulled out his phone and made a show of checking something. I'm afraid there must be some mistake. I don't see any Thompson reservation here. He looked directly at them for the first time, his eyes cold. This is a very exclusive establishment. We have certain standards. Diane took a deep breath, her hand still in Marcus's. She could feel her husband's fingers tighten slightly around hers, their silent signal to stay calm. Sir, she said, her voice steady, we made this reservation weeks ago. We're here to celebrate our anniversary. Anniversary? Weber let out a short, harsh laugh. How nice, but I'm afraid you'll have to celebrate somewhere else. Perhaps somewhere more appropriate for your kind. The restaurant had gone completely quiet now. Every eye was on their table. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others embarrassed, but no one spoke up. A few had their phones out, quietly recording the scene. Marcus stood slowly, his full height impressive in his tailored suit. Mr. Weber, he said, his voice carrying the same authority he used in his courtroom, what exactly do you mean by our kind? Weber's face grew redder. Don't try to twist this around. I know what's happening here. You people come in, cause a scene, then try to sue for discrimination. Well, not in my restaurant. I want you out. Now. Sarah, the waitress, looked close to tears. Mr. Weber, please. Be quiet, Weber snapped at her. Or you can join them in the unemployment line. He turned back to Marcus and Diane. Security. Two large men in black suits appeared almost immediately. Weber pointed at Marcus and Diane. These people are trying to disturb our guests. Please escort them out. Diane stood now too, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. She pulled out her phone and began recording. We'll leave, Mr. Weber. But you should know that everything you've said and done is being documented. Several other diners were openly filming now. An elderly white couple at the next table stood up, the woman shaking her head in disgust. This is shameful, she said loudly, but Weber ignored her. The security guards approached uncertainly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Marcus raised his hand slightly. No need for that. We're leaving. He pulled out Diane's chair further, helping her step away from the table. But Mr. Weber, you should know that this isn't over. Weber sneered. Are you threatening me? Security, get them out of here. Marcus and Diane walked toward the exit, heads held high. As they passed other tables, they could hear whispers of support and see looks of sympathy, but no one else stood up. Pierre, the maitre d', couldn't meet their eyes as they passed. Just before they reached the door, Marcus turned back to face Weber, who was still standing by their abandoned table. Mr. Weber, he said clearly, you might want to Google us tomorrow morning. Have a good evening. They stepped out into the Chicago night, the sound of the door closing behind them like a final punctuation mark on their ruined evening. As they stood on the sidewalk, Diane's hand found Marcus's again. Are you okay? He asked softly. Diane nodded, her eyes steely with determination. Oh yes, and tomorrow, Gerald Weber is going to learn exactly who he just threw out of his precious restaurant. Inside, Weber was already ordering the table to be reset, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours, his world would be turned upside down, and the video of his actions would be spreading across social media like wildfire. By midnight, videos of the incident at Le Blanc were spreading rapidly across social media. First, it was local Chicago groups sharing the clips taken by restaurant guests. Then, as more people recognized the gravity of the discrimination, the videos began spreading nationally. The footage was damning. Multiple angles showed Weber's reddened face as he demanded the well-dressed couple leave his restaurant. His words, more appropriate for your kind, echoed through millions of phones and computers. One clip, filmed by a teenage girl celebrating her birthday at a nearby table, captured Weber's entire tirade in perfect clarity. Meanwhile, Marcus and Diane had gone home to their elegant townhouse in Hyde Park. They sat in their living room, still dressed in their evening wear, watching their phones light up with notifications. Friends, family, and colleagues were calling and texting, having recognized them in the viral videos. "Look at this," Diane said, showing Marcus her screen. The first video had already reached 500,000 views. The comments section was filled with anger and support. People were calling for boycotts of Le Blanc, sharing the restaurant's contact information, and demanding justice. Marcus loosened his tie and sighed. "I didn't want our anniversary to become a civil rights moment," he said softly. "I just wanted to give you a special evening." Diane moved closer to him on the sofa. "I know, honey. But maybe this happened for a reason. How many other couples has he done this to? Ones without our platform to fight back." Their home phone rang, a rare occurrence at this hour. It was Marcus's colleague, Supreme Court Justice William Henderson. "Marcus," the justice said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I just saw the videos. This is unacceptable. Do you want me to make some calls?" "Not yet, Bill," Marcus replied. "Let's see how this plays out naturally first." Around 1 a.m., local news stations began picking up the story. The first headline appeared on Chicago's Channel 7. Prominent couple faced discrimination at a late restaurant. They hadn't revealed Marcus and Diane's identities yet, but that would come soon enough. Sarah, the young waitress from Le Blanc, had finished her shift and was sitting in her small apartment, crying as she typed out a long social media post. She detailed everything she had witnessed, including Weber's history of discriminatory behavior toward minority customers. Her hands shook as she hit post, knowing she would probably lose her job, but feeling she had to do what was right. Back at Le Blanc, Weber was in his office, finally checking his phone after closing the restaurant. His face, which had returned to its normal color, suddenly went pale. Hundreds of missed calls, thousands of social media notifications. His email inbox was flooding with angry messages. He called his PR manager, who answered despite the late hour. "Fix this," he demanded. "Put out a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding. Say they didn't have a reservation. Say anything." "Mr. Weber," the PR manager replied tiredly, "I've seen the videos. There's no fixing this. The best we can do is damage control." In their home, Marcus and Diane were preparing for bed when Diane's hospital board chairman called. "We're behind you 100%, he assured her. "Take whatever legal action you need. The hospital will support you fully." Marcus checked his own messages. His law clerks had created a detailed document of all applicable civil rights violations from the evening's events. His fellow judges were offering support. Civil rights organizations were reaching out, asking to take up their cause. But it was a text from their teenage son, away at boarding school, that finally brought tears to their eyes. "Mom, Dad, I saw what happened. I'm so proud of how you handled it. You taught me that dignity can't be taken, only given away. You didn't give yours away tonight." Diane wiped her eyes and looked at Marcus. "What do you think tomorrow will bring?" Marcus pulled her close. "Tomorrow, Gerald Weber learns that the couple he threw out of his restaurant includes a federal judge who specializes in civil rights cases and the CEO of the hospital network that provides health insurance to half his employees." Outside their window, Chicago's lights twinkled in the darkness. Social media continued to buzz with activity. News stations prepared their morning headlines, and in his empty restaurant, Gerald Weber sat in his office, watching his empire begin to crumble, not yet knowing that the worst was still to come. In less than 8 hours, the sun would rise on a day that would change many lives forever, none more so than Gerald Weber's. His actions, born of prejudice and privilege, were about to meet their consequences in the harsh light of day. The next morning exploded with activity. At 7 a.m. sharp, every major news station in Chicago led with the same story. Federal judge and hospital CEO victims of racial discrimination at a light restaurant. Marcus and Diane's professional headshots appeared side by side on screens across the city. The revelation of their identities hit like a thunderbolt. Marcus Thompson wasn't just any federal judge. He was known for his landmark decisions on civil rights cases. Diane Thompson, as CEO of Chicago Memorial Hospital Network, oversaw one of the largest healthcare systems in the Midwest. They were pillars of the community, respected leaders whose faces regularly appeared in local news and charity events. Gerald Weber learned about their identities while watching the morning news in his kitchen. His coffee cup crashed to the floor as he recognized Judge Thompson's face. "Oh my God," he whispered, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. His PR team had already sent him 15 urgent messages. By 8 a.m., protesters began gathering outside LeBlanc. They carried signs reading "Shame on LeBlancs" and "Justice for the Thompsons." Local news crews set up their cameras, broadcasting live from the scene. The restaurant's phone lines were overwhelmed with angry calls. Sarah, the waitress from the previous night, arrived at work to find the doors locked and a "closed for private event" sign posted. Her social media post from the night before had gone viral, shared over 50,000 times. As she stood there, a news reporter approached her. "Are you Sarah Martinez, the waitress who witnessed everything?" Sarah nodded nervously. "Yes, that's me. Would you be willing to tell your story on camera?" Meanwhile, at the federal courthouse, Marcus arrived to find his colleagues waiting with supportive messages. His law clerks had prepared a thick folder of similar discrimination cases at LeBlanc, discovered through social media and public records. The pattern was clear. This wasn't Weber's first instance of discrimination, just his most public one. At Chicago Memorial Hospital, Diane sat in an emergency board meeting. The hospital's legal team was presenting options. LeBlanc provided healthcare benefits to their employees through Chicago Memorial's network. The contract was worth millions. "We can terminate their contract immediately," the lead counsel explained. "There's a moral conduct clause. What Mr. Weber did clearly violates it." The morning grew more intense as prominent figures began speaking out. The mayor of Chicago issued a statement condemning the discrimination. Celebrity chefs who had planned collaborations with LeBlanc publicly withdrew. Restaurant review sites were flooded with one-star reviews. Around noon, Weber's PR team finally managed to release a statement. "LeBlanc Restaurant deeply regrets the unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred last night. We pride ourselves on providing excellent service to all our guests without discrimination. We are conducting a thorough internal investigation." The statement only made things worse. Social media erupted with more anger. People began sharing older stories of discrimination at LeBlanc, dating back years. Former employees came forward with their own accounts of Weber's behavior. At 2 p.m., Marcus and Diane held a press conference on the courthouse steps. They stood together, still projecting the same dignity they had shown the night before. "What happened to us last night happens to people of color every day," Marcus said into the forest of microphones. "The only difference is that we have the platform to speak out." Diane added, "This isn't about revenge, it's about accountability and change. No one should be judged by the color of their skin, especially not in 2024. Back at LeBlanc, Weber sat in his darkened office, watching their press conference on TV. His hands shook as he poured himself a drink. His phone rang. It was his biggest investor. "Gerald, we're pulling out," the investor said without preamble. "We can't be associated with this." By late afternoon, the story had gone national. Major networks picked it up. Social media influencers shared it. Civil rights organizations called for investigations. Chicago's Restaurant Licensing Board announced an immediate review of LeBlanc's business license. Weber's carefully built world was crumbling around him. His restaurant stood empty, his phone wouldn't stop ringing, and his reputation was in tatters. As he stared out his office window at the growing crowd of protesters, he finally began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. But for Marcus and Diane Thompson, this was just the beginning. They had turned their ruined anniversary dinner into something larger, a moment of reckoning that would force not just one restaurant, but an entire city to confront its hidden prejudices. As the story entered its third day, the impact continued to grow. Major civil rights organizations held a joint press conference announcing their support for Marcus and Diane Thompson. The NAACP's Chicago chapter president stood at the podium, addressing a room packed with reporters. "Judge Thompson and Dr. Thompson's experience has exposed what many in our community face daily," she declared. But this time, the perpetrator chose the wrong couple to discriminate against. Inside his mansion in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, Gerald Weber watched the coverage with growing despair. His phone buzzed with another message. His daughter Rebecca, calling from New York. Dad, how could you? Her voice cracked with emotion. I'm watching the news. Do you know who Dr. Thompson is? She gave the commencement speech at my medical school graduation. She's a legend in healthcare. Weber sat heavily in his leather armchair. Princess, I didn't know. That's the point, Dad. You never know because you never bother to look past skin color. I'm ashamed. My friends are asking me if my father is really that racist restaurant owner from Chicago. The call ended with a click, leaving Weber staring at his phone. Outside, more protesters had gathered. Someone had spray-painted raciste across LeBlanc's elegant front windows. At Chicago Memorial Hospital, Diane was meeting with her executive team. The hospital's legal department had completed their review of all contracts with LeBlanc. We provide health insurance for 68 of their employees, the head lawyer explained. If we terminate the contract, those workers and their families will lose coverage. Diane thought about Sarah, the young waitress who had shown them kindness. We can't punish innocent employees for their boss's actions, she decided. Instead of canceling the contract, let's use it as leverage for change. Meanwhile, at the federal courthouse, Marcus was reviewing a thick stack of complaints against LeBlanc. His law clerk had compiled testimonies from dozens of people who claimed they'd faced similar discrimination at Weber's restaurant. Your Honor, the clerk said, there's a pattern going back at least 5 years, but most people didn't report it officially because they felt nothing would be done. Marcus nodded slowly, and that's exactly why this can't be just about one incident or one restaurant. That afternoon, Chicago's mayor called an emergency meeting with city officials. The Restaurant Licensing Board presented their preliminary findings. Not only had LeBlanc shown a pattern of discrimination, but they'd also found health code violations and tax irregularities. We have grounds to revoke their license, the board chairman stated. The question is, should we? The mayor looked thoughtful. Before we decide, I want to hear from Judge Thompson and Dr. Thompson. They've handled this with remarkable grace. Their input matters. Back at LeBlanc, Weber sat alone in his empty restaurant. The lunch service had been canceled again. His chef and 3 servers had quit. Sarah had given an emotional interview to a local news station describing years of witnessing discrimination at the restaurant. Weber's phone rang, his PR team with more bad news. The Michelin guide that contacted them, LeBlanc's coveted star, was under review. Celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay had tweeted about the incident, calling it disgraceful behavior that has no place in the restaurant industry. As evening approached, Marcus and Diane received an unexpected visitor at their home, Rebecca Weber, Gerald's daughter. The young doctor had flown in from New York. I needed to apologize in person, she said, tears in her eyes. Not just for what my father did, but for all the times I saw his behavior and said nothing. I'm a doctor because of you, Dr. Thompson. Your work in healthcare equity inspired me. Diane hugged the crying young woman. Then help us make this a moment for real change, she said softly. Marcus watched the interaction, an idea forming in his mind. Perhaps there was a way to transform this ugly incident into something positive. Not just a punishment for one man's actions, but a catalyst for genuine transformation in their community. That night, as Chicago's evening news ran more coverage of the story, Marcus and Diane sat in their study, drafting a proposal. It wasn't about destroying Weber or his restaurant. It was about creating lasting change in their city's dining industry and beyond. Ready to make some real impact? Marcus asked his wife. Diane smiled, taking his hand. Always. Let's show them how justice and compassion can work together. The next day would bring more surprises as their plan began to take shape. A plan that would affect not just LeBlanc, but restaurants throughout Chicago. 1 week after the incident, Marcus and Diane Thompson called a major press conference at Chicago's City Hall. The room was packed with reporters, community leaders, and restaurant industry representatives. Gerald Weber sat in the back row, looking tired and aged, accompanied by his daughter Rebecca. Marcus stepped up to the podium first. What happened at LeBlanc wasn't just about one restaurant or one man's actions. He began. It's about a larger problem that exists throughout our city's dining industry. Today, we're proposing a solution. Diane joined him at the podium, opening a folder. We're announcing the creation of the Chicago Restaurant Equality Initiative, she announced. This program will provide training, certification, and support to ensure all restaurants in Chicago become truly inclusive spaces. The proposal was comprehensive. Every restaurant in Chicago would have the opportunity to participate in a free training program. Those that completed it would receive an Equality Certified designation. The program would be funded by a combination of private donations and city support. In the audience, Weber shifted uncomfortably as Diane continued. Chicago Memorial Hospital Network will provide free diversity training to all restaurant staff in participating establishments. We're also creating a scholarship program for minority students interested in culinary arts or restaurant management. Marcus then revealed the surprising part of their plan. And to show that change is possible, LeBlanc will become our pilot program. Mr. Weber has agreed to temporarily step down from management and allow his restaurant to be the first to undergo this transformation. Gasps filled the room. Cameras turned to Weber, who stood slowly. His daughter squeezed his hand as he walked to the podium. His voice shook as he spoke. "I've spent the past week reflecting on my actions and their consequences," he said. "I've lost business partners, friends, and most importantly, the respect of my own daughter. I realize now that I've been part of a problem that needs to change." Rebecca joined her father at the podium. "As the new managing director of LeBlanc, I'm committed to making our restaurant a model of inclusive dining. Every staff member will undergo training. We're revamping our hiring practices to ensure diversity at all levels." The press conference continued with more details. Sarah, the waitress who had spoken out, would become part of the training team. LeBlanc would close for 1 month for renovations and staff training. When it reopened, it would host a series of charity dinners benefiting civil rights organizations. Local restaurant owners in the audience listened intently. Some looked skeptical, others interested. The head of the Chicago Restaurant Association stood up to speak. "We're encouraging all our member restaurants to participate in this program," he announced. "It's time for Chicago's dining scene to lead the way in creating truly welcoming spaces for everyone." After the press conference, Weber approached Marcus and Diane privately. His eyes were red. "I don't deserve this chance," he said quietly. "You could have destroyed me and LeBlanc completely." "This isn't about destruction," Diane replied. "It's about transformation. Your restaurant can become an example of how change is possible." Marcus added, "Your daughter believes in this change. We're giving you the opportunity to prove her faith in you is justified." Meanwhile, the initiative was already gaining support. 3 major Chicago restaurant groups announced they would participate. Celebrity chefs offered to conduct workshops. Civil rights organizations pledged to help develop the training materials. That evening, local news stations led with the story. From controversy to change. "Chicago Restaurants Unite for Equality," read one headline. Social media buzzed with positive reactions. The mayor's office released a statement fully supporting the initiative. Back at LeBlanc, workers were already taking down the old signs. Rebecca Weber stood watching, her father beside her. "We're going to make this work, Dad," she said firmly. "We're going to make it better than before." Weber nodded silently, watching as years of prejudice and privilege were literally being stripped away from his restaurant's facade. The racist graffiti was being cleaned off, symbolic of the larger cleaning that needed to happen inside. Marcus and Diane drove past LeBlanc on their way home that evening. Construction crews were already at work, preparing for the renovation. The restaurant's transformation would become a symbol of hope for the entire city. "Think it'll work?" Diane asked her husband. Marcus smiled. "It has to, because now everyone's watching, and that's exactly what we needed." The city of Chicago was about to embark on a remarkable experiment in social change, all because of one ruined anniversary dinner that had turned into something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. 3 months after the announcement of the Chicago Restaurant Equality Initiative, LeBlanc was ready for its grand reopening. The restaurant had undergone more than just physical changes. Under Rebecca Weber's leadership, the entire culture had been transformed. The once all-white staff now reflected Chicago's diversity. Sarah, the waitress who had stood up against discrimination, had been promoted to front-of-house manager. The kitchen staff included talented chefs from various backgrounds, each bringing their own influence to the traditional French menu. On reopening night, a long line formed outside LeBlanc. News crews set up their cameras as people waited eagerly to see the changes. The restaurant's exterior had been redesigned, its new sign reading Le Blancs, where everyone belongs, in elegant gold letters. Inside, Gerald Weber stood nervously in the corner, watching his daughter direct the staff. He looked different now, humbler, quieter. The past months of diversity training and counseling had changed him. He still owned the restaurant, but had kept his promise to step back from management. "Dad," Rebecca called, "the Thompsons are here." Marcus and Diane Thompson walked in, accompanied by leaders from various civil rights organizations. The crowd outside applauded as they entered. This time, there was no question about their reservation. Sarah greeted them warmly. "Welcome back to Le Blanc," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Your table is ready." As they walked through the restaurant, they saw the changes. The walls now displayed art from diverse artists. The menu had been expanded to include French fusion dishes celebrating different cultures. Most importantly, the dining room was filled with people of all backgrounds. The Chicago Restaurant Equality Initiative had exceeded expectations. Over 200 restaurants had signed up for the training program. The Equality Certified seal had become a sought-after designation, with some restaurants reporting increased business after receiving their certification. During dinner, Rebecca approached the Thompsons' table. "We've raised over $100,000 for the Culinary Scholarship Program," she reported proudly. 5 minority students will receive full scholarships to cooking school next year. Gerald Weber watched from across the room as his daughter chatted with the couple he had once thrown out. The irony wasn't lost on him. His biggest mistake had led to his restaurant becoming a model for change. Later that evening, Marcus clinked his glass for attention. The dining room fell silent as he stood to speak. "3 months ago, my wife and I came here to celebrate our anniversary," he began. "Tonight, we're celebrating something bigger, the power of transformation. Le Blanc has shown that change is possible when people are willing to learn and grow." Diane stood beside him. "This initiative has already trained over 500 restaurant workers across Chicago. We've handled 28 discrimination complaints through our new reporting system. But most importantly, we're changing the culture of dining in our city." The mayor, who had joined them for dinner, added her own comments. "Other cities are asking to copy this program. What happened here in Chicago is becoming a national model." Sarah brought out a special anniversary cake for Marcus and Diane, the celebration they should have had 3 months ago. As she set it down, she smiled at Gerald Weber, who had finally found the courage to approach the table. "Judge Thompson, Dr. Thompson," he said softly, "I know I can never fully make up for what I did, but seeing this restaurant now, seeing the changes in our industry, I want to thank you for giving us the chance to be better." Marcus shook Weber's hand. "Sometimes justice isn't about punishment," he said. "It's about creating the opportunity for change." As the evening wound down, reporters interviewed diners leaving the restaurant. The reviews were overwhelmingly positive. "It's not just the food that's improved," one guest said. "There's a different feeling here now. It feels welcoming to everyone." Rebecca closed the restaurant that night with tears of pride in her eyes. The staff gathered for a final meeting, their diversity now a strength rather than a source of tension. They had reservations booked solid for the next 3 months. Outside, Marcus and Diane stood on the sidewalk where they had stood in humiliation 3 months before. Now they watched as people of all backgrounds entered and exited Le Blanc freely, each treated with the same respect. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked his wife. Diane smiled, looking at the transformed restaurant. "Yes," she said. "But this time, we're leaving with hope instead of hurt." The Chicago night was warm and welcoming, much like the new Le Blanc itself. Proof that even the darkest moments could lead to unexpected light. 1 year after the incident that changed Chicago's restaurant industry, Le Blanc hosted a special celebration. The restaurant was closed to the public for the evening, filled instead with people who had been part of its remarkable transformation. The occasion was twofold: celebrating the first anniversary of the Chicago Restaurant Equality Initiative and honoring Marcus and Diane Thompson's 11th wedding anniversary, properly this time. The dining room looked magnificent. Tables were decorated with fresh flowers, and a small stage had been set up in one corner. The walls, once displaying only traditional French art, now showcased a diverse collection of works by local artists. A banner hung above reading "1 year of change, a lifetime of progress." Rebecca Weber stood at the entrance, greeting guests alongside her father. Gerald Weber had spent the past year working hard on himself. He had completed extensive diversity training, attended counseling sessions, and slowly earned back some measure of respect in the community. Judge Thompson, Dr. Thompson, he said as the couple arrived. Thank you for coming. His voice was different now, humbler, more genuine. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone. Inside, Sarah, now the restaurant's general manager, directed her staff with quiet confidence. Under her leadership, LeBlanc had maintained its excellence while becoming truly inclusive. The restaurant had even earned back its Michelin star, this time with a special commendation for its commitment to equality. The mayor of Chicago took the stage first. 1 year ago, an act of discrimination sparked a movement, she began. Today, over 500 Chicago restaurants are equality certified. Our city has become a national model for inclusive dining. She shared impressive statistics. Complaints of restaurant discrimination had dropped by 60%. The scholarship program had sent 15 minority students to culinary school. 3 other major cities had adopted similar programs based on Chicago's model. Rebecca spoke next, emotion clear in her voice. A year ago, my father's actions showed me how much needed to change. Today, LeBlanc stands for something different. We've served over 50,000 guests this year, each one treated with equal respect and dignity. She introduced some of their success stories. A young black chef who had risen to sous chef position, a Hispanic hostess now managing their new second location, and several scholarship recipients currently interning in their kitchen. When Marcus and Diane took the stage, the room fell silent. This was their first time speaking publicly about the incident in months. We could have pursued legal action, Marcus said. We could have tried to shut this restaurant down. But sometimes, the path to justice isn't through punishment, it's through transformation. Diane added, what happened to us that night was painful, but look what grew from that pain. A movement that's changing not just restaurants, but hearts and minds. The surprise of the evening came when Gerald Weber stepped up to the microphone. His hands shook slightly as he spoke. A year ago, I was the face of everything wrong with our industry, he admitted. My own prejudices, which I had denied for so long, were exposed for everyone to see. I lost friends, business partners, and almost lost my daughter's respect. He paused, gathering himself. But thanks to the Thompsons' incredible grace, I was given a chance to learn and change. This restaurant is now a testament to what can happen when we open our hearts and minds to everyone. The evening concluded with a special dinner service. The menu featured dishes created by their diverse kitchen staff, combining French techniques with influences from around the world. Each course told a story of inclusion and creativity. As coffee and dessert were served, Marcus and Diane sat at the same table where they had been humiliated a year before. But now, everything was different. The restaurant buzzed with warm conversation in multiple languages. The staff moved confidently through the room, reflecting the city's diversity. Sarah brought them a special anniversary dessert, the same one they should have had a year ago. Better late than never, she said with a smile. Looking around the room, Marcus squeezed his wife's hand. Who would have thought, he said softly, that one of the worst nights of our lives would lead to all this? Diane smiled, watching Rebecca and her father working together harmoniously, seeing the proud faces of their scholarship students, noting how naturally everyone interacted regardless of their background. Sometimes, she replied, it takes a moment of darkness to show us where we need to bring light. Outside LeBlanc, Chicago's evening lights twinkled. Inside, the restaurant glowed with something more powerful than its elegant chandeliers, the light of real, lasting change.